This is Gemara Menachos, Daf Lamed Dalid, and we're holding the top of Lamed Dalid Amud Aleph. We are 4 lines from the top, in the middle of an intense and quite a breather, a little bit, of our sugyas of Kachim, as we're discussing the halachas of mezuzah. So we pick it up, Lamed Dalid Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the top. Itmar, says the Gemara. Lul pasuach min abayis aliyah. We have a lul which is open, a stairwell literally, from the ground floor to the second floor. Amar Rav Huna mishlei pesach echad chayiv mezuzah achas mishlei beis psachim chayiv v'shtei mezuzahs. If there's one entrance, you put up one mezuzah. If there's 2 entrances, then you put up 2 mezuzahs. Amar Rav Huna, we learn. Hi idrenuna to isle arba bavi, excuse me. This chamber that has 4 gateways, 4 entranceways, chayiv be'arba mezuzahs. Frak the Gemara shkayach pshita. Whoa, it's the chiddush of Ada. Each chamber, each separate room requires its own mezuzah. Says the Gemara lo yitzricha. Aval gav diragal bechad. You really only go through one doorway. So you would think the other ones maybe not. Similar to the Gemara that we learned yesterday, then not. But over here, since each is its own independent entrance, therefore each will have its own mezuzah. We should just mention that Kemat, in all cases, the whole idea of I only use one doorway doesn't really exist la halacha. The only cases where it could exist, just to make mention, is something like an emergency exit, something like a loading dock, areas which aren't real doorways. They maybe look like a doorway, but they're just not used as a doorway. But once you have a doorway that is a doorway and it's used as a doorway, then even if it's used seldomly, lemaisa, there's going to be a chiyuv mezuzah. Continues the Gemara 10 lines down. Amar Ameimar, Peschoda Korana, chayiv mezuzah, corner entrance. You put a mezuzah on there. Ravash Ameimar, Voslas lepetzimim. There's no side posts. So Amar Le, he responds, Adei petzimi. No, there are side posts. So again, these are always complicated. What exactly is the case? Seemingly the Havamina was mamish on the corner, and the Tarot says it's not on the corner, but it's really at the end of one side. Okay. Rapapa Shmuel. Rapapa went to visit Mar Shmuel. He saw a certain entranceway which had 1 doorpost. Now this is very common. Sometimes you can have a wall that extends, and the other side is going to be 1 doorpost. And in such a scenario, you run into complications. And in our modern houses, this is extremely common. So it doesn't need a doorway, doesn't need a mezuzah. So says the Gemara, if it's mismala, if the 1 doorpost is on the left side, and yet, there was a mezuzah. Amalei Rav Papa responds, Kiman, Kirevi Meir. This goes according to a Meir that says you have a 1-sided doorpost, but a mezuzah. Understand. You're right. If you have 1-sided doorpost on the right side, then ain't a chanami. Then avada, you'll be chayv mezuzah. But if your 1-sided doorpost is on the left side, frak Gemara, then I understand what you're talking about. Then there's no chayv mezuzah. Responds the Gemara, my hai. Where does this come from? The Tanya. We learned in a braysa beisecha biascha min hayemin. Zakt Torah. The mezuzah should be on the right side, on the doorpost of beisecha, your house, which means when you come in on the right. Atoimer miyamin. Oyen elam ismal tamalaymar beisecha, your house. What does that mean? My Talmudo. What's this drasha? Amarabba derech biyascha min hayemin. The way of biyascha, which means the way of going in is on the right side. Which leg do you pick up first? Now, obviously, this is not really unanimous, but in general, What leg does it pick up first? Says the Gemara, your right leg. That's the way of walking. And this is the makar. It's an incredible makar, something that we all need to know, because we know it has to be on the right side. Mehecha teisi, because the biyascha, the way of going. What's the way of going? That your first step is your right foot. Says the Gemara, another makar. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't see the highlights. Rav Shmuel Baracha Kamei Rabba B'Mishnei Rava Rabba Barula Amar Me'acha Vayikach Yehoyada Koyin Aroin Echad. He took one aroin Vayikav Chor B'Daltoi, and he made a hole in the lid. An aron here is a box. V'Yitin Oisay Eitzel HaMizbeach, and he placed the box near the Mizbeach, even on the right side. Revoy Ish Beis Hashem, as one entered in to the house of Hashem. The Nos, new 3 lines to the wide lines. Shama Kayanim Shemrei Asav, and the Kayanim who were the watchers, as Kol HaKesef Amuva Beis Hashem, all the money that was brought into the Beis Hashem, they placed there. So says the Gemara. So what do we learn out from this drasha? We see over here that this box on the right side. So we see that whenever we say as you enter, as you come into the Beis Hashem, it means on the right side. So 2 different drashas showing us that the place of mezuzah is on the right side. And therefore, we have a kasha, because Rameir seemingly was the shita that we wanted to quote, that says a one-sided mezuzah, a one-sided doorpost is yes chayiv in mezuzah. But says the Gemara, it's not so simple. Says the Gemara, what do we see? We see a one-sided doorpost is not necessarily chayiv in mezuzah. It has to be on the right side. So to answer the kasha, says the Gemara, my Rameir. Who is this Rameir that we're talking about? Titanu learned in a brayso. Titanu never learned in a brayso. Vayishin la'lapatzem echad Rameir chayiv mezuzah v'cham poitrim. My time of the Rabbanan. Why the Rabbanan say you're a potter? Mezuzos. Ksiv, plural. My time of the Rameir. Titanu learned in a brayso. Mezuzos, says the brayso. Shtayim. Mezuzos. Shemeani, we lost the place. Excuse me. Shemeani miyot mezuzah ishtay. We know that the miyot, the minority, the mezuzah is 2. Kishaoimer mezuzah is beparsha shniya. Then the Torah says it again. Sheitam uleimar, which is an extra word mezuzah. Have a riboy achariboy. So says Rabbi Meir. The Gemara is adding on. What's it memayit? Mi'akos of lemezuzah achas divi Rabbi Yishmael. Zokt Rabbi Yishmael, so the Torah downgrades from 2 mezuzahs to 1. Rabbi Akiva Omer einay tzarich. Says Rabbi Akiva, you do not need such a drasha. Kshaomer al hamashkoif, when it says al hamashkoif al shtei mezuzahs on the lintel and the 2 doorposts. Shein tamalei mer shetei. Why does it say shtei mezuzos? Ma tamalei mer shtei. Zebanav, that what? Kamakum shenemar mezuzos. Einay ela achas. That even though the word mezuzos is plural, but says Rabbi Akiva, we find by Karban Pesach, it says shetei 2, which teases us that in Shar Kol HaTorah Kula, that against Torah, that what does the word mezuzos mean? It must be that the word mezuzos in a vacuum means 1. And that's why the Torah had to articulate in that one particular place that it means 2. So we have 2 Mekairais, says Rameir, that a single-sided doorpost, yes, is obligated in a mezuzah. The story that we started with by Rav Papa that visited Mar Bar Shmuel, that the seemingly was mezuzah on the left side, we don't really have a shot why that is, because the Gemara explains that a single-sided doorpost, even Lefi Rameir, is only going to be if it's on the right side. That is how this shtickle concludes. We continue with Tana Rabbanan. We go into the Etzem Mitzvah of mezuzah. Uchsavtem, says the Torah, you would think, write it on the stone, on the doorway itself. Or maybe so says Gemara, near Lemitaime. Danim ksiva no yehagis the dairis ksiva negus the dairis vein danim ksiva negus the dairis ksiva shein negus the dairis. So we learn out from ksiva That is the Haggis the Dairais from the similar scenario, which is the case that happens to be a case of divorce, and that's going to be our mikar. Moshe Amar la'alan ve'imar lahem baruch mipev yikari elai es advarim ha'ileh v'ani kaisev ala sefer b'dyoi. Frekti maram le'ravacha the Rav Hashi Rachman Amar al mezuzahis stayed in the Torah on the mezuzahs v'ata amrit neilef ksiva. I don't understand. It says mezuzahis on the doorposts, and you're telling me we could learn it out from the ksiva of a get that has to be in a scroll, meaning Frekti Gemara, the drasha doesn't usually come along and negate Pashib Shan in the Pasik. Omar Cross says Rav Ashi uchsaftem ksiva tamah. It has to be a complete writing, v'hadar, and then it says al mezuzahis. So we're modifying what is the ksiva tamah. It's on the scroll. So why do you need the gzeir shava? Maybe write in a stone on a doorpost and then put it up. That would be the way to be mekayim the two steps. Kamash malan, that no, you write it on a scroll. And that really concludes a long and lengthy sugya of mezuzah, a very famous sugya in Shas. Menachos am Gimel am Dalid, the sugya of mezuzah. And now we continue quoting the next part of the Mishnah. Again, we're within a larger discussion of the things that are ma'akev one another. And now we're up to next is tefillin. So 4 lines on the bottom, Lamadal Amar Aleph says the Gemara Arba Parshim Tefillin Ma'ak V'Zuzu. The 4 parshas of tefillin are ma'akev one another. Va'afilu ksav echad ma'akvan, even one passage, even one letter, even one ksav is ma'akev. Frak the Gemara, Pshita, what's the chiddush? Of course, if you're missing a letter, it's ma'akev. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, le'nitzcha ela, le'koitzai shel yod. Ivan am Pshita. That's also Pshita, because that's not a yod. Le'nitzcha ela le'dach Rav Yehuda. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, koloi she'in givil mukaf la'ar b'am b'chasab sulais. So that's the chiddush that has to be that level of ksav that has to be completely surrounded by parchment. And now, similar to the limud by mezuzah that we saw, that once we got involved in the halachas of mezuzah, we took a deep dive into mezuzah. Says the Gemara, let's do the same thing with tefillin as we turn over Lamed Daled Amid Beis. La Tanarabban Anu L'Toitafais, 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 a drasha. That if you remember, we had this drasha elsewhere. I look in the side and I remind myself we had it in Sanhedrin. We had it in Zvachim. Hare kan dalid, Divrei Rav Yishmael. Why? Why is it dalid? Because one time it says with the plural, the teitafas shavav, plus the other 2 equals 4. Rabbi Akiva Omer, I think we might have had it in Sukkah also. Says Rabbi Akiva, Inoi tzarich tas, tat. Says Rabbi Akiva, no, I read that completely incorrectly. One more time. Says Rabbi Akiva, Inoi tzarich. You don't need that, Joshua. Why? So how do you know 4? Tat bekasvei shtayim. Tat in the language of kasvi means 2. Pas ba'afriki is shtayim. That's how we know l'toita faiz. The word itself indicates that it's going to be 4. The word itself shows us that you need to have 4 compartments in the mezuzah. Tanarabanan yachal yechtvel al dalid ayrai, says the Gemara. Maybe you have to write it on 4 pieces of hay v'nicham bedalid batim and place it into the 4 compartments bedalid ayrais and put them in to the hide. Meaning, how do you know you write in klaf and then you put the klaf in the compartments? Maybe you write it on R and you put that into the compartment. It should be 1 zikaron, which shows us it all comes from one piece of. It shows us that what? Excuse me. I lost the place. Tamlamer zikaron b'nei necha, zikaron echad amarti lecha. That shows us 1 zikaron. V'lo basic gimel zichronis. So what does that mean? So we have 1 zikaron, but we have 4 boxes. Well, 4 compartments. Says the Gemara, HaKeitzad, Koisvin al Dalid Oiris. Says the Gemara, you write it on 4 heights, 4 clefs. Umanicham b'dalad batim. But ba'ar echad. It all comes out of one piece of hide. You take one piece of hide, and you fold it, and the one hide is folded and folded and folded in order to make separate compartments inside. And if you open up your tefillin, this is what you would see. Says but if you did fakir, if you wrote it on one piece of parchment and put it into 4 boxes, you'd be yotzeh. As long as there's a space between the compartments. But they agree. Both Rebbe and Chacham agree that you have to put a string or a cord between each and every compartment. There has to be some level of separation between the two. And this is really where it comes from in our tefillin, that you know that you'll see those lines in the tefillin. That's showing the separation in the tefillin. The main charitz in nicker. And if the groove, if these compartments are not recognizable, psulais, it is possible. And obviously, most of these halachas are halachas Moshe Sinai. But what we're learning is that the compartments have to even be recognizable from the outside. Now, of course, this is all, as I'm pointing to my head, these are all tefillin shel reish. Tana Rabbanan, says the Gemara, we're smack in the middle of them, but the first line is psulais. Says the Gemara, keitzad kaisin tefillah shel yad. So tefillah shel yad is indeed on one piece of parchment. They have to be connected. It's supposed to be on one large piece of hide. Shenemar, why? Just like there's one ice on the outside, there's no charitzin, there's no grooves, it's just one box of tefillin shel yad, so too on the inside. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yasi, Amrein Tzarech. Am Rabbi Yasi, Madli Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shemein Lai Tefillin Shel Yad, V'Yeshal Shei Tefillin Shel Reish. A fascinating halacha. Let's say you don't have a Tefillin Shel Yad, but you have 2 Tefillin Shel Reishis. She'atoyle or al achas mehem. You know you do. Put an extra piece of R over one of your Tefillin Shel Reishis, umeinicha, and then place it on his arm in order to mask at some level that it's going to be like tefillin shel yad. What do you mean that Rav Yehuda was maida in this case? This is the case that Rav Yehuda argues. The Rav Yehuda says that he needs to have 4 different compartments. Amar Rava midvarav shel Rav Yasi. Midvarav shel Rav Yasi chaz Rav Yehuda. From Rav Yasi said, Rav Yehuda is chayzer. Let's go back to Rav Yasi. Eini, is it really shaykh to use your tefillin shel reish on your arm? Tefillin shel yad, you can make it into tefillin shel reish. However, tefillin shel reish, it's in shel yad. Why? And in tefillin shel reish is a higher level kedusha, so can't go down to tefillin shel yad. Says Malay Kasha, but we're not talking about used tefillin. We're talking about new tefillin that it was made at tefillin shel reish. You now could lower it down a level according to Rav Yasi. But if you hold that the hazmana, that the designation is important, that means that there's a kedusha intrinsic even when it's just designated tefillin shel reish. So now you can't lower it. Why? Because you're lowering its kedusha. Then you need to make it tanai originally. Tana Rabbana, we conclude. Keitzad Sidron, what's the sidra of the parashiyos? Kadesh Levi Kviacham Yemin, Shema Vayim Shemaya Mismol. These are the 4 parashiyos in Tefillin Shel Reish. Kadesh Vayim Kviacha Shema and Vayim Shemaya. I Vatani Ibcha. Am Rabbi Lokasha Kan Miyemin Shel Kairei Kan Miyemin Shel Meniach. Vakairei, and when you read it, of course, Kairei's Kisidron, you read it in order, and of course, this is where the famous machlokes Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam comes from, as to being what is the seder of the parashiyos. And this is where it comes from. Rashi, where that he learns the Gemara, that's where Rashi's tefillin comes from. Rabbeinu Tam, quoted in Taisus over here, argues with Rashi, and he has a different order, and that's where tefillin to Rabbeinu Tam come from. So it's important to note, we know it's a famous machlokes, but we have the schos of being able to learn the Gemara right now together. So Nachamal, Rashi over here, Rashi's 5-6 lines to the bottom, discusses how you learn the Gemara. Rabbeinu Tam comes along in Taisvis, and Rabbeinu Tam in Divrei Maskil, let's just pull up the Taisvis so we can see it. And he starts off Pirush B'Kuntris, but then the Kasha Rabbeinu Tam, the famous Kasha, Rabbeinu Tam comes along, and then based off of that, Rabbeinu Tam gives his pshat to Mafarish Rabbeinu Tam, the first one, in Kadesh Yacham Yumin Shal Kairei Umismol Shal Kairei Have Shama Mibachotz V'Achrev Ayim Shemay Mimifnim, and that's how Rabbeinu Tam is different seder in the order of the parashiyos. We'll pick it up from here. B'siyata Dishmaya.